How's everybody doing? This is now part 2, or the used part of what guitar amp would I buy for $100. I'm only going to look at Guitar Center this time because they have a lot of used stuff. They have 5,200 used amps, so it's a pretty good representation of what you're going to be able to find almost anywhere, unless you know somebody that's selling like a one-off. And it'll save a lot of time versus checking a bunch of other websites or Reverb or whatever. There's going to be probably similar products. Guitar Center takes a lot of used gear on trade-ins or just buys it, so there should be good options here. For the new amp at $100, it was a Marshall MG15, which has a single 8-inch speaker. It's a little combo. And in that video I said that I would probably get that amp, but just get it used as well. It's still my answer for the new one at $100, but I would also look for one used, maybe save a little bit of money, because those are reliable. But I don't know until what we're about to find out what additional amps come into the price range at $100 if they're used. So I probably won't find one on the low end here that I would choose, but I'm going to look through everything anyway until we get to 100. That's the wrong photo. I've never heard of a Kona KA10. I've never heard of a Volts GA10. I've never heard of a Bellcat 15G. That's probably good. Crate used to make some really good solid state stuff. So that thing probably works fine. Washburn, BC Audio, Epiphone, which obviously somebody overseas is making this for them to brand it that way. Well, I mean, these are all probably made overseas. Custom V-Lead. Doesn't look like that has gain. Volume, bass, treble, reverb. Alright, let's keep looking. A Zenny GA10. There's a lot of these little, 5 to 20 watt little combos available. There's a Marshall MG10, 1 by 6.5 inch, 10 watts. For $40, that's probably the first amp I would actually look at or contemplate buying, I suppose. But that's way below our $100 limit, so there's probably going to be something better. Rocktron Rampage, a Behringer Firebird, a PV Backstage 2. I think I had a bass amp that was similar to this, and it was okay as far as quality, so that amp would probably run. The speaker looks pretty small though, which I guess these all are at this point. We're still under $50, so what the heck is that? That's very weird. An Orange Crush 12 for $50. If you really like the sound of an Orange, I guess you could try to look for one that's used in this price range. Of course, these are all solid state, small combos at this point. Apparently Ibanez made one. Keith Urban, 15 watt. That's very strange. I mean, Keith Urban is did he really make a little amp? I mean, Keith Urban's like he's a country artist, but I don't think he's American. That's odd. That's really strange. It does have a drive level. Huh. Interesting. I'm not going to close that tab. I'm going to leave it there as an option as we proceed. Line 6 Spider. These things have a lot of built-in effects, so if you're somebody that wants a lot of effects, like at the drop of a hat, you might consider a Line 6 Spider. That'd be a good option. I don't like all those digital effects, though, so I wouldn't consider it, but if you can find a used Line 6 Spider amp and you have a player that might want a lot of effects, that could be a good option because it's kind of an all-in-one package. Let's see. You know, there's a lot of options actually of amps that will amplify your guitar at this price for $60 and under. That's pretty impressive, just I suppose by itself. I'm seeing a lot of these Crush 12s in the $60 range, so again, if you like orange, that could be something to look for. That is interesting. Some kind of an old Boss MG10. It looks like it has two very small speakers. Never seen this before. 4-Force EM1. Very weirdly shaped amp. Let's see if I can determine anything from this. Bass, mid, treble, overdrive, volume. Yeah, that's pretty strange. I don't know what the power rating is. 15 watts with an 8-inch speaker. I mean, if you wanted something that nobody has literally ever seen or heard of before, that would be one. I mean, it's sitting on a stool, I guess, in this picture, and that's an 8-inch speaker. So it looks fairly large for having just an 8-inch speaker. Like, the back of it's very wide. If that's the power plug, I mean, that's pretty wide little amp there. Weird. Never known about that before. Vox, a 30 watt, 1x12. Well, you know, that's to have a 12-inch speaker, even to be 30 watts in solid state. That amp probably moves the most air that I have seen. Oh, actually, well, this one next to it, Spider Classic 15, or this Line 6 Spider 430 watt 1x12. So there's a 12-inch. So in the realm of $75 used, you start to find 12-inch speakers that could actually move some air. 12-inch speakers are kind of the standard with guitar amps because that's the size where you can actually feel the amp with your body by the fact that it's moving the air in the room. Any speaker that's smaller than that is kind of hard to get that effect with. Not to say that it's going to have to be definitely loud, especially with these being solid state. You can turn them down really quietly, but you also can start to feel an amp with a 12-inch speaker, really at any wattage. It's the speaker diameter that starts to become more impressive to the player. So that's interesting. A Line 6. Vox if you like the sound of a Vox and you know what it is, then they're great for you, but they're kind of a niche tone, in my opinion. Like, they're very distinctive. They're not very versatile. I think that's what I would say, is they have a very distinctive tone that's not super versatile, which their players tend to like. But I've never been a huge Vox fan. I've never owned one. I've owned a number of different amps over the years, but they tend to have a very sort of chimey, glassy sound that would be good with, probably better with single coils than, all my guitars have humbuckers, and maybe better for like a clean or clean pushed sound versus like a high gain overdrive sound. They're not really great at that, in my opinion. So I'm not going to open that as an option. Here we go. We got a crate that looks to be in decent shape and a Laney. So these are two old school solid state brands that are obviously reliable, because these amps are probably from the 90s, both of these, and they're probably going to keep running for, another 20 or 30 years beyond. But they're not really, they don't do anything for me tonally, so I'm not going to look at those. Or a Custom, for example, it's another one. So actually, we're getting into some good, like, borderline vintage stuff here, that if you wanted to have, like, one of these brands, you can actually start to find them at $75. So that's good to know. Dean Markley Ultrasound. That's a strange name for an amp. There's an old Marshall MG15 at 75, and it's an 8-inch. So this is basically like probably not much different mechanically from the current one, but it looks old, and you're only saving $15. And then if you were to ship it, you often get free shipping with a new purchase, but not with a used purchase. So the shipping price would bring this to the price of a brand new one. So unless you specifically wanted like a vintage looking MG15, I would rule this out, because it's so close to the brand new one that's also like $99.99. You're not going to save any money unless you just want a vintage one there. Gamma G25. I'm not really familiar with that. Fender MD20 Mini Deluxe, I guess. KX50. I wonder if that has any sort of overdrive or gain channel on it. If it's a 50 watt, that's probably a really good price for that. I think that's the first 50 watt of anything I've seen. I used to have one of these, a Marshall MG CF, which is just basically an MG but with the carbon fiber detailing, and that's kind of what I was impressed with it. I kept it for a while, but I didn't use it a whole lot. But I used it like very sparingly if I needed to play something like in the living room in my apartment and I didn't need to be super loud. But considering, our budget is $100, why would you come in this close to under budget? But again, in my new video, I said I would just get a used one and save the money. And I guess now that I'm seeing them, that means that if I had one right in front of me in the store that was used, I would choose it. But I kind of thought there would be more of a price drop than $15 or $20. Because at that point, you don't overcome the shipping from the new one. Another Crush 12, that's in pretty good shape. I played, I think, the Crush 20 with reverb, and that was pretty good as far as an orange amp sort of manufactured tone goes. So these probably give you a good tone, again, if you like orange. But obviously, I think we saw some of these at like $50 or something like that, and now you're looking at 86. So I don't know why there's such a big spread, because percentage-wise, that's pretty big. So get one cheaper than 85, I guess. A Fender Mustang is, in my understanding, well, I'm going to skip it. Another sort of vintage crate. You know, I thought that Guitar Center would put vintage on something, but I guess these are not quite vintage in the listing. But to me, they're vintage because the company's not around, and they just made like solid stuff that was solid state that lasts for like decades. PV Viper, VYPYR, is kind of competing with the Line 6 amps that have a lot of built-in effects, to my understanding. But neither one of those is really spectacular. Like the Line 6 Spider, I guess, competes with the Viper. But I want to say that the Spider has been out longer, and I would therefore not compare it. What the heck is that? We've got Fender Mustangs everywhere here. Fender amps like this are probably going to have a good solid state clean sound, and I think that's probably going to be their best feature. I don't think they really do gain stuff very well. A bunch of these acoustic amps. These are really, I think the acoustic brand of amps is literally geared towards acoustic guitars, which is not what I'm focusing on here, so I'm going to skip those. That looks like a super tiny little Vox something or other. Oh, that's an old looking custom 66 Dart. Yeah, it's like padded. It's like wrapped up like 1960s looking, but this is probably from much later than that, probably like the 80s or 90s. Again, they're very reliable. They just don't have a distinctive sound. Guitar Research T30R. That's pretty weird. A Holmes Mini Picker. Never heard of that. A Nux Mighty 15. Drive G65. You know, these just, to me, don't seem to offer a whole lot. Oh, here we go. A Marshall Valve State VS20. So I actually had a Marshall Valve State of some sort. I want to say it was probably a 50. It was similar to this, but it had casters. And that's an old series of amps, and I had that basically before I moved to my current city. I was trying to put together a guitar rig to be able to play while I visited my grandparents specifically. So they basically took me to Guitar Center, and I picked out some things that I could use just sort of in a practical sense for just playing like once or twice a year for them. And I picked out a Marshall Valve State on a whim because the name kind of indicates that they're trying to sound like tube, but with solid state. And of course, I mean, any amp should be trying to do that, but, you know, the name Valve State I thought was interesting. And it really didn't sound half bad. But the one that I found was bigger than that one, and it was in really, I would call it, everything worked mechanically, but it looked about as dusty as this, but it also had like a huge tear in the grill cloth, and it looked like it was in rough shape, but it worked fine, and I was able to pick it up for a sensible price, or rather they were, because they bought it for me to be able to play at their house. So I was grateful for it, but it was bigger than this one also. I'm pretty sure it was a 50. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot at $99.99 because that's where we are now. So we're at the top of the budget. Some of these things I'm just going to click on because I've never really seen what they are. But the ones that I do know about, I'm probably going to skip. That is a classic look, the dark blue padding on a custom amp like that. That was kind of their thing. If you are a custom aficionado, I would probably consider that, but I'm not an aficionado of them. Let's see. Is there anything else? Oh, okay. So now we've just passed 100, so that's the end of it. And no more shopping. So here we have a Line 6 Spider 4, full of built-in effects, I'm sure, but the overall tone of these, to me, doesn't really have anything going for it. It's kind of a nothing tone. So you can put a lot of effects on. Basically, if you're looking to shop like for your kid for a guitar amp, and they seem to gravitate towards music that has a lot of guitar effects, like a lot of 80s reverb or a phaser or a flanger or some sort of heavy effects that you think they might want, and you don't know if they're going to stick with it, so you don't want to necessarily get individual effects or even like a multi-effect pedal, this would be a good option just to let them play around with it, but they're going to quickly find that it doesn't really emulate any kind of manufactured sound of an amp that would be satisfying. It's mostly the effects that are the lure for this. So not a bad product, but it's mostly for somebody who is interested in effects more than the tone of the amp. So I'm going to rule it out for myself personally. This I've never even heard of. See if I can look at the controls and see what's going on here. Gamma G25. It has Bluetooth, so it must not be decades old. But clean blues, rock, and metal. You have, looks like 4 channels. That's pretty cool. It has an aux in and a headphone out. It's basically loaded with features: bass, mid, treble, volume, drive. That's your voicing, or I guess your channel switch. But I guess it doesn't have reverb, but it looks to be fairly feature-rich for what it is. I just don't have any experience with it tonally, so I'm going to rule that one out. Crate KX50. I also want to see the control panel of this if it's going to be a 50-watt amp. Level 1, level 2. I can't really read that. I'm guessing this is equalization. It says low, mid, high, master, something, and then level. So if this is just a clean amp, which I don't have any evidence to the contrary, I'm going to rule it out because I wouldn't want an amp that doesn't have a high gain channel so you can play rock and metal, or even anything with gain for that matter, you know, country or blues or anything like that. If it's a clean amp, I don't think I would consider it. I've also never heard of this. I'm very curious about this. Fender RAD. It looks like it is carpeted, like looks like it's covered in carpet. It has a clean and overdrive. It has 2 inputs, a high and a low input. the overdrive at least says crunch and lead. It has a contour, which is kind of like an EQ that's all built into one switch, or one potentiometer rather. So like as you move a contour switch, it would be like if you moved all three, the high, medium, and low EQ switches all at the same time. And then volume, but it's got a lot of inputs and outputs that I'm not quite sure what these are all for. So unless this is for something aside from typical use, I might rule this out, but this is an interesting little thing because it kind of looks like a dirty Yeti. Kind of fascinating, but I'm not too sure about it. Obviously, it does have overdrive, crunch, and lead. So this might be something that if you saw it in person, it might be worth checking out, but I'm not confident enough about what all this is right here. So I'm going to rule that one out. Guitar Research T30R, presumably that's a 30-watt amp. What is that? That's like a very simple control layout. It has inputs including XLRs. I mean, this almost doesn't even strike me as a guitar amp. Just looking at this control layout. Inputs and lines, but it doesn't strike me as a guitar amp. Unless it's like an acoustic amp specifically. It's very simplistic. It doesn't seem like it would do what I would want an amp to do. Holmes Mini Picker 12. I've never heard of this, so I clicked on it just to see if I could see what the heck this is. That's odd. A square back of a speaker. Usually it's like a circular magnet you'd see back here. Kind of weird. It only has 3 knobs. It probably doesn't have overdrive, I'm guessing. I guess I'll rule that out. Valve State VS20. If I can recall my Valve State amp that I had, it definitely had like a high gain channel and everything like that. It was basically like one of their first forays probably into solid state to mimic like a DSL or that sort of classic Marshall tone, you could say. Yep, so there's a gain. That's probably the clean channel, and this is probably the gain channel. It's really dirty, though. I mean, the amount of like dust and grime on this, it almost looks like it has dirt. Like beyond just dust, it looks like it actually has like mineral dirt on top of it. That might be a deal breaker for me, so I'm going to rule that out. That's going to be very hard to get that thing clean ever. Austin AU20B. Never heard of this either. I clicked on this because I didn't know what it was. Volume, treble, mid, bass. Oh, it says it's a bass amp. AU20BS2 bass amp. So that's in the wrong category. I'm realizing I'm running out of options here for what I actually chose. We're we're back to this 4-Force EM1. Wonder if I can see the control panel and see if this has gain on it. Bass, mid, treble, overdrive, volume. A speaker out, that's interesting. Instrument in, and an on-off switch. So, pretty simple, doesn't have different channels. That might be something that I would play if I saw that in store, just to see like what the heck is this. But not knowing anything about it, I would not commit $70 to that. And now we're just down to the Keith Urban 15 watt. Is that really Keith Urban's thing? Keith Urban guitar amp. Apparently he did. They're all called Keith Urban amps. The brown Tolex is kind of interesting. So it looks to be fairly feature laden. Instrument input. There's a drive gain knob, master volume, treble, mid, and bass. And then it has built-in reverb, and it has a 1/4-inch headphone out, which is useful if you have a 1/4-inch headphone. But otherwise, you would have to get an adapter for it if you're like a beginner. I don't think a lot of beginners have 1/4-inch like studio headphones necessarily. And then a power switch. Visually, it's kind of cool. I've never heard one of these. I'm guessing it doesn't get to like metal levels of gain because Keith Urban doesn't play that way, but it probably gets to a pretty good crunch level, like for rock and country. This is definitely something that, with everything that I currently have, and for $50, I mean, it's not even close to the $100 limit. We're halfway there. I might, like, if I had to pick one right now with everything I currently have, I might order this just to check it out, because I think I've never heard of this, and it looks to be fairly feature laden. But realistically, what I would do would be what I did in the first video, which would be to get a Marshall MG15. And rather than get the new one, just because of the rules, because these are probably going to be the same price when you factor in shipping, or they're going to be very close, this is what I picked in the new amp video, what I would pick for $100, the MG15 1x8 15 watt. I would just pick the used one. I mean, realistically, I wouldn't pick one that was this old unless you just wanted something that old, but it looks old. I mean, it's got like the huge logo here that kind of gives it away that it's an MG. The newer ones are more discreet about the fact that they're an MG solid state amp. So I guess I would pick this one if I have to pick a used one. But if I was going to spend within a few dollars, when you factor in the shipping cost, I would still just pick the new one. So that's a very boring conclusion for the $100 amp video, but again, like I said in the new video, these Marshall MGs, they do give you a very good manufactured approximation of the sound of a Marshall, which is pretty much all you're going to get really from any of the branded small amps like this. I guess if I were a beginner and I was going to be gigging or trying to play with drums, I would pick something that has a 12-inch speaker. Not that you would necessarily have a whole lot of room as far as the power output goes, even if it was 20 or 30 watts, that's not really good to compete with drums, but at least having a 12-inch speaker, if you could find a 30 or 50 watt amp, you know, if your goal was going to be gigging, you might pick something like that the custom 50 watt that's just a clean amp, and then later on you add a distortion pedal to it, just to give yourself enough power, just depending on what your goals are. With this, you're not going to be able to keep up with any sort of drums, but the tone of the amp is going to be really good for a practice amp. The quality is going to be good, and it'll be loud enough to annoy your family, but not loud enough to annoy your neighbors, type of a thing. So that's what I would pick. And of course, if I was in the market for an amp like this, I wouldn't consider myself like, I don't want to say good enough to be playing with a drummer, but it's kind of like a beginner amp market. So it just kind of depends. I would pick one of these because I know that they're good sonically, just for a bedroom practice amp. But again, if you can find anything with a 12-inch speaker, you're going to be better off if you might be playing with a drummer. And that is my conclusion. So if you like this video, if you want to dispute anything that I said, or let me know your thoughts, what you might have picked or what you have experience with in the comments below, go ahead and do that. And don't forget to share this video and subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you guys next time.